A simple black woman named Rachel Carter was ruthlessly humiliated, drenched with soda, and shoved violently out of the Pinnacle Marketing Solutions office right in the heart of downtown Chicago. Her soft pleas were like invisible dust, drowned in the mocking, cruel jeers of her heartless colleagues, until her secretly powerful billionaire husband, Nathan Carter, appeared. With nothing but his cold presence, he burned their entire deceptive world to the ground. Rachel Carter, a black woman, plain in her faded gray cardigan and old khaki pants, sat focused on the screen, trying to finish the weekly report. Her natural curly hair was neatly tied, her worn flats resting beneath the desk, a silent acknowledgement that she didn't belong to this shallow world. And then, the moment came. Jessica Monroe, the account manager, known for her expensive Gucci bags and frozen heart, walked by holding a cold can of Coca-Cola. A half-smile appeared, wicked, eager to witness a breakdown. Without warning, Jessica lifted the can and threw it directly at Rachel. Bam! The sound of metal hitting wool, the soda can bursting open, and the sugary liquid splashing across Rachel's old gray cardigan, soaking both her chest and the laptop keyboard. Sticky droplets of soda clung to the neatly stacked papers, turning a week's worth of effort into a messy, damp heap. "Oops, thought you needed a shower to wake up, Hick." Jessica laughed loudly, her shrill voice echoing through the room. In the stunned silence that followed, before Rachel could react, Logan Reed, the greasy sales guy with gelled hair, stepped up from behind and kicked her chair's leg with force. The chair tipped over, and Rachel staggered, nearly falling to the floor, her thin, frail hand grasping the edge of the desk to steady herself. Laughter erupted like fireworks. Ashley Kim, the designer who lived for social media clout, raised her phone, started recording, her giggles barely containing the delight. "This is gold," she shouted. "People will die when they see this on Instagram." Rachel stood there, drenched, the cardigan hanging heavily, dragging her dignity down with it. Piercing eyes surrounded her, disdain, enjoyment, and cruelty. No one stepped forward to help. No hand was extended. She was utterly alone. A breath caught in Rachel's throat. She bit her lower lip, her hands trembling as they gently touched the keyboard, as if trying to hold on to the last shred of her dignity. She could hear Jessica's mocking laugh, Logan's taunting whistle, Ashley continuing to record. From the high-rise glass office in the distance, Brian Foster, the team leader, stood with his arms crossed, looking down, his mouth curling into a cold, steel-like smile. No words were needed. To them, Rachel was just a poor, black woman, cheap, unworthy of existing in their gilded world. But if they thought Rachel Carter would fall easily, they were about to make a mistake they would never be able to erase from their lives. The soda can clinked across the floor, leaving a sticky trail across the bright, neon-lit room. Rachel stood frozen like a statue, the sharp, sweet scent of soda clinging to the air, to her skin, to the faded creases in her old cardigan. No one moved closer. No one spoke up to defend her. They all just watched in silence, as if they were watching a cheap spectacle. And Rachel, with her honey-brown skin and simple attire, was the unwelcome star of this cruel joke. She took a deep breath, fighting back the hot tears threatening to spill, then bent down to pick up the soaking papers from the desk. Every movement felt like a silent wound to the pride that was desperately clinging to her insides. In the corner of the room, Jessica Monroe crossed her arms and shook her head, feigning pity, her voice high enough for everyone to hear. "Honestly, someone please buy her a new shirt. This looks like it just came out of a charity bin." Laughter erupted. Logan Reed, the sales rep who loved to flaunt his gold Rolex, whistled and turned to Ashley Kim. I wonder how she got to work this morning. Took the bus? Or walked from some rundown house on the south side? Ashley, in her bright red Prada dress and Louboutin heels, pretended to cover her mouth with a playful laugh, but her eyes were full of malice. "She looks like one of those people standing on the corner asking for change," she whispered, loud enough for Rachel to hear. Those whispered words weren't new. They had been slithering around since the first day Rachel set foot in this office, a shiny glass and steel building where the unofficial uniform consisted of bespoke suits, Italian leather bags, polished shoes, and makeup as perfect as if it were lifted straight from a Vogue cover. From the very first moment, Rachel knew she was different. For them, her simplicity was undeniable proof of the inferiority deeply ingrained in their discriminatory subconscious. With her brown skin and natural curly hair, she was automatically assumed to not belong in this world. A world where a person's worth was measured by the logo on their shirt and the number of followers on Instagram. Rachel remembered her first morning walking through the revolving glass doors of Pinnacle. She wore a simple white blouse, black slacks, and her favorite second-hand tote bag. Jessica's glance then, the quick, sharp once-over from head to toe, spoke volumes. "You don't belong here." No words were needed. That look said it all. From that moment on, things only got worse. The Monday morning meetings where Rachel presented data analysis were met with blank stares and discreet yawns. When she suggested process improvements, Logan burst out laughing, stroking his chin as if she had told a joke. When Rachel exceeded her targets, not a single congratulatory word was spoken. They didn't need a clear reason to dislike her. Her skin color, her simplicity, and the way she refused to participate in extravagant parties or competitive boasting, these were enough to make her the target. She was not one of them. And so, to them, she had no value. There were times when Rachel wondered if things might be easier if she tried to fit in, bought some designer clothes, and faked a smile at the boring stories about vacations in the Maldives or shopping trips down Fifth Avenue. But then she would push the thought aside. She was Rachel Carter, a black woman raised in the poor neighborhoods of West Chicago, who had scrimped and saved for college, who knew that real value didn't lie in expensive possessions but in integrity and dignity. She couldn't, and didn't want to, sell herself just to be recognized by people like Jessica or Logan. Yet, that resolve didn't make the daily cuts any less painful. At lunch, when Rachel sat alone with her homemade lunch, the whispers of ridicule rang out from across the room. "She's probably saving up to pay for her shabby room rent, huh? Or saving to buy some soap for that cardigan." When she entered the meeting room, the sound of high heels tapping rapidly on the stone floor seemed to highlight the loneliness of her old worn flats beneath her. When she spoke, cold glances shifted away, as if her voice didn't exist. Day after day, hour after hour, the invisible wall around Rachel tightened. It wasn't direct attacks, but 1,000 tiny cuts, eyes, laughter, indifference, disdain, and each cut, no matter how small, bled her self-respect. That evening, as Rachel silently wiped the soda off the desk and closed her soaked laptop, she knew that what had just happened wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was the culmination of months of quiet, brutal prejudice, of invisible knives slicing through her pride. And this office, the one with the gleaming glass walls, the expensive suits, the painted smiles, had revealed what it truly was: a luxury cage full of rotting souls. Rachel didn't speak a word. She quietly gathered what little could be salvaged from the desk, her heart heavy. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large window, casting a strange halo of light on her faded gray cardigan, like a delicate, unshakable aura. She knew, from this moment on, everything would be different. A storm was coming. And this time, she wouldn't stand there suffering alone. The fading late sunlight cast long gray streaks on the cold marble floor, leaving shadows across the surface of the glass windows of the high-rise building. Rachel Carter tightened her grip on the faded tote bag as she slowly walked down the empty corridor. The laughter behind her faded, like scratches that lingered in her mind, impossible to erase. She didn't look back. She didn't want anyone to see the redness in her eyes. During her months at Pinnacle, Rachel had learned to shrink herself like a small plant trying to survive in the shade. She arrived early, left late, always tucking herself into a small corner near the window, where the sunlight gently touched the endless spreadsheets she loved. Among the numbers, the complex data sets, Rachel found peace. A simple order that didn't require her to wear designer clothes or make meaningless small talk with her petty colleagues. She loved her work. Loved the feeling when a chaotic string of numbers gradually revealed a hidden pattern. Loved the feeling of contributing to the success of a major marketing campaign without needing to grab any spotlight. Loved those quiet moments when it was just her and the world of logic, where skin color or social status couldn't interfere. Rachel thought that as long as she worked hard and stayed humble, people would eventually accept her. But this world, at least the world at Pinnacle, didn't work that way. The bullying didn't begin with loud, obvious actions. It crept in like toxic steam, little by little, seeping into every crack. At first, it was just quick glances, snickers when she passed through the hallways. Then came the snide remarks that everyone pretended were unintentional. "Nice sweater," Jessica Monroe once said sweetly in a meeting. "Did you find it at Goodwill?" Logan Reed added. "Looks like last winter's collection, 2003. Those words, those laughs lingered in the air like small thorns. Not enough to draw blood, but enough to tear at her dignity bit by bit. Rachel learned to pretend she didn't hear. She forced a smile, lowered her head, and continued her work, pretending those cuts didn't hurt. But slowly, those subtle actions became bolder. One morning, when Rachel sat down at her desk, she found her coffee cup had been knocked over onto a pile of documents she had prepared for a client meeting. The pages were smeared, the numbers smudged to the point of no repair. Ashley Kim, with an innocent face, looked up from the next desk and asked loudly, "What's going on, Rachel? Who's so clumsy?" Her voice oozed with fake sweetness that made Rachel's stomach churn. No one took responsibility. No one admitted fault. Rachel quietly gathered the soaked papers, silently reprinted everything, silently redid it all, like the mistake was hers for being careless. Some days the chair she sat in was deliberately lowered, making her fall flat when she sat down. On other days, when she opened her desk drawer, a crude note was shoved inside. "Don't try. You'll never be accepted here." Of course, no one signed it. Of course, when Rachel looked up, she only saw innocent faces, or worse, mocking, challenging smiles. Sometimes, at the end of the day, when the room was empty except for her packing up, Rachel would stop by the glass window, staring out at the busy people on the street below. In the yellowish light of the sleepless city of Chicago, Rachel wondered, was there anywhere else where she truly belonged? A place where people saw her potential before they saw the color of her skin. A place where she wouldn't have to fight every day just to claim the right to exist in silence. But even in her weakest moments, Rachel had never thought of giving up. Her grandmother, who had raised her after her mother passed away, had once told her, "They may look down on you because of your skin color, because you're not rich, because you're not like them, but never look down on yourself." Her grandmother's words were like a small flame, quietly burning in her chest throughout the long, wet, cold days at Pinnacle. Even though she was treated like a ghost, even though she was humiliated, she worked hard. Every completed data set, every precise report submitted on time, every successful campaign she contributed to behind the scenes. These were the proofs Rachel gave herself that she was worthy, not to them, but to herself. But Rachel knew one thing for sure. Patience couldn't last forever. Beneath the silence, a small crack had formed, and one day, very soon, it would burst open and nothing would be able to stop it. She didn't know how that day would come. She just knew that when it did, she wouldn't back down. Not even one step. Rachel Carter had never deluded herself into thinking that her patience would make them change. But even in her worst nightmares, she never imagined that the simmering hatred that had been building up could ferment into a public humiliation campaign, a meticulously staged hunt. The week following the day she quietly wiped the soda from her desk, the atmosphere in the Pinnacle office became eerily different. No more random jokes, no more rough shoulder nudges disguised as accidental. Just a false silence, a stillness too stretched, like a taut string waiting to snap. Rachel felt it in every furtive glance that swept across her when she entered the meeting room, in the whispered words that quickly died down as she passed by the shared kitchen, in the way Jessica Monroe smirked as she typed quick messages to Logan Reed and Ashley Kim, never taking her eyes off Rachel. They were preparing something far worse than soda cans or scornful sticky notes. Rachel knew. Her instincts, honed through years of growing up in harsh surroundings, whispered alarms in every cell of her body. But she didn't know the details. She just knew that with every smug grin, every victorious look, every snicker, there was one thing they were saying. They no longer just wanted to humiliate her in the shadows. They wanted to destroy her, publicly. And at the center of this conspiracy, like a patient spider weaving its web, was Jessica Monroe. Jessica had never accepted Rachel's existence. To Jessica, every time she saw Rachel, in her simple clothes, without designer labels, without layers of thick lipstick, was a personal affront. Because Rachel's presence, like a silent reminder, exposed everything Jessica prided herself on. Expensive dresses, luxury bags, a glossy appearance, was nothing more than a hollow shell. She couldn't stand a black woman dressed in second-hand clothes, carrying an old tote bag, standing next to her in the same office, in the same position. No, Rachel wasn't allowed to exist here, and Jessica would make sure of that. Every lunch hour, when the small groups gathered in the cafe downstairs, Jessica, Logan, and Ashley huddled together, their heads leaning in like conspirators planning an ambush. "We need to show her her place," Jessica whispered, her voice sweet but venomous. "Publicly," Logan smirked, in front of the whole office. "And we have to record it," Ashley added, her eyes lighting up with dark excitement. They didn't just want to embarrass Rachel. They wanted to crush her, turn her into a viral joke on social media, make her a living example of how, at Pinnacle, anyone who didn't fit in like them would be ruthlessly crushed. The plan was meticulously crafted like a dark marketing campaign. Jessica would lead, pretending to assign Rachel an urgent task on Friday afternoon. Logan would set the trap with his crude, mocking words, encouraging the crowd to join in. Ashley would handle the filming and upload the video to Story as quickly as possible, complete with pre-written, humiliating captions. They even set up a cover story. If their boss found out, they'd blame Rachel for being out of sync and too sensitive. A perfect attack. Brian Foster, the team leader, who should have been stopping any workplace bullying, knew about this. He knew full well. But he just stood by with his arms crossed, a cold smile appearing whenever he saw Rachel quietly working. To Brian, Rachel was just a disposable pawn, a nuisance in the perfect picture he was painstakingly creating. An office full of the right kind of people. A simple black woman with no powerful connections, no support, could be nothing more than trash that needed to be eliminated. Meanwhile, Rachel, though she felt the growing undercurrent beneath her feet, chose to remain silent. She didn't want to believe that they could be this cruel. She didn't want to believe that, in the 21st century, in the heart of a modern city like Chicago, racism and classism could still be so openly and brazenly displayed. But she was wrong. And the storm that Jessica Monroe and her team were nurturing in the shadows was waiting for the right moment to explode. That Friday afternoon, as the clock neared 4, as the sunlight outside the window faded into a pale orange hue, and as everyone began to dream of the weekend ahead, Jessica stood up. She grabbed a stack of documents and walked straight toward Rachel, a twisted, sweet smile on her lips. The whole office seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The trap had been set, and the prey, even with all her pride and strength, had stepped right into it. The trap had been set, and as Jessica Monroe approached with the thick stack of documents, the entire office seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The fluorescent lights reflected off Jessica's polished high heels, casting a cold, calculating sheen. No one spoke. No one warned. They all just stared, as though watching a dark play whose ending had already been written. Rachel Carter looked up from her laptop screen, her tired brown eyes calm, though weary. She had known something was coming. She just hadn't expected them to be so brutal. Without a greeting, Jessica aggressively threw the stack of documents onto Rachel's desk with such force that her water cup nearly toppled over. The papers scattered, some slipping off the edge of the desk, fluttering to the floor like broken wings. "Here you go." Jessica smiled sweetly, her voice shrill and cutting across the room. "You don't have anything important to do, right? Please help us sort through this mess. Thanks." The remark ended with a mocking wink so blatant it bordered on absurdity. Rachel looked at the stack of documents, all outdated printouts, faulty data, expired reports from the previous year, nothing but garbage. A humiliation wrapped in the guise of a task. And she knew, at that moment, every eye in the room was on her, waiting to see how she would react. Would she stay silent and sink deeper into the role of the useless pawn? Or would she lash out, branding herself with the word weak? Biting her lower lip lightly, Rachel fought to maintain her composure. She spoke softly, but firmly. "I have my own deadline to meet. These documents aren't part of my duties." Her words weren't loud, they weren't angry, but to Jessica they were a defiance that could not be forgiven. Her cold, green eyes narrowed into slits. "Oh, I'm sorry," Jessica sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. "Sorry to bother our dear princess." At that moment, Logan Reed, the greasy sales guy with his slicked-back hair and smirking grin, burst out laughing, clapping loudly as if watching a comedy show. "I guess Rachel's busy getting ready to apply at Dollar Tree," Logan shouted, causing a few others in the room to laugh along. In another corner, Ashley Kim pulled out her phone, the camera peeking behind the screen. She switched to video mode, zooming straight into Rachel's face, then lowering the camera down her worn cardigan, as if to emphasize the low class they mocked. Rachel felt it all. She felt the flashing lights from the phone screen. She felt the soft click of the record button. She felt every sneering look tightening around her like invisible nooses. But she sat still. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just clenched her fists under the desk, her head slightly bowed as if trying to shrink into the smallest shape possible. Ashley quickly uploaded the video to Instagram Story, adding a snarky caption. "Thrift store chic is alive and well among us." And as the notifications of new messages rang out constantly from the crowd's phones, Rachel understood that the video had been shared, watched, and laughed at, all within seconds. She had been turned into a joke, a living meme, a failure in their eyes, because she didn't wear the flashy material shell that society revered. Meanwhile, Jessica continued to stoke the flames. Wonder how much longer she's going to cling on here. Maybe she's waiting for her long service reward at the local bakery, Logan shouted, making the room burst into laughter. Ashley tilted her head, pretending to ponder. If Rachel would just live stream how to tie cheap shoelaces, she'd probably get a few follows. The three of them laughed uproariously, not even trying to hide their malice. Despite it all, Rachel remained seated. Every humiliating word rained down like hail. Every scornful glance pierced through her heart. But she didn't let them see her break, because deep down, Rachel understood. If she cried, if she lashed out, if she reacted, she would give them exactly what they wanted. And she, Rachel Carter, the strong black woman, would never give them that victory. In the distance, Brian Foster, the team leader, stood leaning against the office window frame, arms crossed, wearing a cold, approving smile. He wouldn't intervene. He didn't need to get his hands dirty, because others were doing the dirty work for him, and Rachel, in his eyes, was just a number soon to be erased from the payroll. Rachel closed her laptop slowly, her breath steady. She knew she couldn't sit here much longer. A decision was forming in her heart, slow but sure, like tectonic plates shifting beneath the ocean's surface. They thought she was weak. They thought they had won. But they had forgotten one thing. In silence, sometimes, true strength begins to awaken, and all it took was a spark, a single phone call, and everything would change forever. Rachel Carter closed her laptop, her hands still trembling slightly. In that suffocating air, she felt every scrutinizing glance pierce through her damp cardigan, as if trying to tear apart her last fragile defense. She took a deep breath and gripped the strap of her tote bag. A part of her wanted to stand up and run away from this cold place. But another part, the part that had endured for years, held her back, forcing her to stand firm, to endure just a little longer, just to prove that they couldn't break her. She thought she had made it through the venomous attack until the sharp click of heels echoed. Brian Foster, the team leader, stepped out of his private office. His light blue shirt was pressed perfectly, his silver tie neatly fastened, the flawless appearance of a man accustomed to making decisions from a position of power. He walked slowly down the row of desks, his detached gaze passing over the other employees before finally stopping right in front of Rachel's desk. The atmosphere around her froze. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see how the final blow would land. Brian leaned forward, placing his hand on the edge of Rachel's desk, a stiff, polite smile appearing on his face, one that was too practiced to feel sincere. "Rachel," he began, his voice smooth as though issuing a routine administrative directive. "I think, if you're feeling overwhelmed today, you might consider heading home a little early." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a naked hook. No one could mistake the implication. It wasn't friendly advice, it wasn't concern. It was a polite way of telling her, "You're no longer welcome here." Rachel looked up at him, her gaze not quite defiant but not resigned either. She knew that Brian Foster wasn't innocent in all that had transpired. He had seen, he had heard. He had chosen to turn a blind eye. And now, he stood there, draped in the cloak of a responsible manager, trying to erase the traces of his involvement with a gentle shove out the door. Not stopping there, Brian reached into his pocket and pulled out a pale yellow sticky note. He didn't say another word. He simply dropped the note onto Rachel's desk, as if discarding a scrap of trash. The paper floated down, landing face up with 4 cold, sharp words written in black ink. Clean up your act. 4 simple words, but each one was a knife thrust into Rachel's bleeding self-respect. No more pretense, no more veiled mockery. This was direct, public humiliation, stamped with the weight of power. A clear declaration. You are trash. You are a burden. You don't belong here. The moment stretched on like an eternity. The sound in the room seemed to be sucked out. Rachel felt the strong, painful beat of her heart in her chest. In a distant corner, Jessica, Logan, and Ashley couldn't hide their victorious smirks. Ashley lifted her phone, slyly capturing the moment Rachel bent her head over the humiliating sticky note. Logan whistled softly, a mocking tune. Rachel tightened her grip on her tote bag. In her mind, the words her grandmother had taught her rang out, like the distant rhythm of drums. They can crush you, but only if you let them. Your worth is not in their eyes. Your worth is what you decide it is. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, trying to pull together the shattered pieces of her pride. No, she wouldn't break. No, she wouldn't let these people, the ones clinging to superficiality, define her worth. But Rachel also knew that this moment was a turning point. A boundary had been crossed. A limit had been broken. And for the first time in all her months of suffering, Rachel didn't want to endure in silence anymore. She didn't want to keep bearing it quietly. As Brian Foster turned and walked away, as if he had completed some menial task, Rachel gently picked up the sticky note. She folded it carefully, like a keepsake, not to preserve the shame but to remember who chose to treat her like trash, who had started the storm that they would soon have to face. Without a sound, Rachel stood up. Her chair squeaked softly behind her, like a quiet sigh for what was about to happen. She walked slowly toward the break room, her hand gripping her phone tightly. And for the first time in months, she felt no fear as she tapped the familiar name in her contacts. Nathan Carter. The fateful call. A silent cry for help, but one full of power. The storm had finally arrived. The break room door slammed shut behind Rachel with a sharp click, marking the end of all her silent endurance over the past months. The fluorescent lights in the small room cast a cold, yellowish hue on her face. The mirror above the sink reflected the image of a woman with reddened eyes, tangled curly hair, and a dark gray cardigan soaked with dried soda stains. Rachel leaned against the wall, her legs weak, as if they could no longer hold her up. For the first time since everything began, she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, no torrents of tears, just silent drops rolling down her cheeks, carrying with them the shattered pride, the loneliness that had been buried for so long. Her hand trembled as she fumbled for her old phone in her pocket. The screen lit up, reflecting her tired and pained face. His name appeared at the top of the contact list. Nathan Carter. Her husband. The only one who saw her true worth, even when the whole world chose to look the other way. Rachel hesitated. For all this time, she had tried to keep silent, tried to carry the burden alone, just so Nathan wouldn't worry. She didn't want him to have to step away from multi-billion-dollar meetings, international deals, to come back and protect her from these petty, cowardly games. She had once thought that if she could just endure a little longer, it would all pass. But now she understood. She couldn't and shouldn't fight alone anymore. Her fingers trembled as they moved toward the call button. Her heart pounded in her chest, a silent urge to reach out. She pressed the button. The phone rang less than 3 times before it was answered. "Ray?" Nathan's voice came through, warm and familiar, like a lifeline in the vast ocean. "Are you okay?" Just those 2 short words made the walls Rachel had built around herself crumble. She exhaled sharply, choking back a sob, struggling to hold herself together. "I'm not okay. Nate, today, it's been awful." On the other end of the line, the atmosphere shifted in an instant. When Nathan spoke again, his tone had changed, firm, protective, like steel wrapped in velvet. "Where are you?" he asked quickly. "Pinnacle. Break room on the 6th floor," Rachel whispered. "Okay." "Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." Nathan's voice wasn't loud, wasn't harsh, but Rachel could hear the power in it, a power that made her tremble, not from fear, but because for the first time she felt she was no longer alone. Before she could muster a weak protest, the call ended. Nathan had hung up. He was coming. Rachel pressed the phone to her chest, closed her eyes, and rested her forehead against the cold wall. In that moment, all the pain, all the humiliation, all the shame, everything seemed to break free. She didn't have to hold it in anymore. She didn't have to cage the hurt in her chest anymore. She allowed herself to fall for a few precious seconds before taking a deep breath and standing tall again. Nathan was coming, but she wouldn't let him see her broken. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the trust he had in her. Outside, the Pinnacle office remained as noisy as a broken market. Jessica Monroe, Logan Reed, and Ashley Kim huddled at the coffee counter, laughing and chatting loudly, completely unaware that the storm they had sown was racing toward them with unstoppable speed. Ashley posted another photo, a close-up of Rachel's worn-out tote bag placed next to the wet stack of documents. Caption: "When Goodwill fashion meets corporate standards, check epic fail." Likes and comments flooded in, feeding the cruel joke. Logan took a sip of his coffee, smug. "I swear, I've never seen anyone more suited to the role of a loser than her." Jessica laughed, fixing her shiny blonde hair. "Wait until Monday. I bet she'll call in sick. No one can handle that kind of humiliation." But they were wrong. Rachel Carter was not someone who would run. She wouldn't leave in silence like a shamed ghost. And when the ding from the elevator rang just minutes later, a small sound that shook the entire 6th floor, they would realize that the game they thought they were winning had officially ended. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped out of the break room. She wiped away the last remaining tears, adjusted her cardigan, and straightened her back. In the dimming light streaming through the windows, she was no longer the small figure crushed by disdain. She was Rachel Carter, and she was ready for everything that was coming. Rachel Carter stepped out of the break room, each step heavy yet resolute. She had prepared herself for the moment when everything they thought, everything they believed about her, would be turned upside down. And then, as if the universe itself held its breath, the soft ding of the elevator echoed through the center of the 6th floor lobby. The entire Pinnacle office seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped abruptly. The tapping of keyboards slowed and then ceased entirely. All eyes turned toward the slowly opening elevator door. And then he appeared. Nathan Carter. Stepping out of the elevator, tall and composed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, each step exuded an unmistakable aura, absolute power. The light from the rows of LED lights reflected off his shiny Italian leather shoes, gliding effortlessly over the marble floor like a silent declaration. A true force had entered the room. His hair was neatly slicked back, his sharp black eyes cold as steel. His angular face, with a strong jawline and tightly pressed lips, made the entire space around him seem to constrict, tense to the point of suffocation. Nathan didn't look at anyone else. He didn't need to search. He walked straight, like an arrow cutting through the stunned sea of people, heading directly for Rachel, the only one he saw, the only one he cared about. Jessica Monroe, standing half-hidden behind the coffee counter, froze. The latte in her hand shook, spilling slightly over the rim. Logan Reed, who had been mocking Rachel just minutes earlier, stood with his mouth agape, his fingers stiff by his coffee cup. Ashley Kim, still holding her phone, forgot to press record. The entire office, every person, every breath, stilled. No one needed an introduction. Because in Chicago, the name Nathan Carter needed no explanation. President of Carter Enterprises, a powerful conglomerate owning dozens of subsidiaries, including Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, one of the most influential and secretive billionaires in the Midwest, a man whose nod could determine the fate of hundreds. Reaching Rachel, Nathan paused. His gaze softened slightly as he looked at her, but his voice remained firm and strong. "Ready to go, Rachel?" The simple, gentle question rang out like a death knell to the entire room. Rachel lifted her head, her gaze locking with his. In that instant, all the hurt, all the humiliation, all the silent beatings, everything seemed to be soothed by this man's steady presence. She gave a small nod. "I just need a minute," Rachel replied, her voice still slightly hoarse from holding back tears, but filled with calm. No tears, no trembling. Just a powerful silence, the kind of strength no one in that room could match. Jessica swallowed hard. In her mind, the pieces of the puzzle slowly clicked into place, and a terrifying truth began to form. Rachel was not a poor, failed woman. Rachel was Nathan Carter's wife. It couldn't be. It couldn't possibly be true. She glanced around, seeking confirmation from someone, but only found bewildered, horrified eyes reflecting back at her. Logan Reed instinctively took a step back, the chair behind him creaking. Ashley Kim stuttered, her mouth opening and closing, hands gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Even Brian Foster, from his glass office, stood frozen, his face changing color, his hand clutching the doorframe until his knuckles turned white. They understood. They all understood. And for the first time in this cold, superficial office, they were afraid. Nathan scanned the crowd, his gaze slicing through them like a blade, marking every face, every silent stance. No shouting needed, no threats required. His presence alone was enough to suffocate the entire room. Rachel bent down, calmly gathering her laptop and faded tote bag. No hurry, no awkwardness. She did everything with the poise of someone who knew, in that moment, she held all the power. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Jessica squeezed through the crowd, forcing a strained smile. "Mr. Carter," she stammered, her voice trying to regain its professionalism. "It's an honor to have you visit Pinnacle. May I get you some coffee?" Her voice quivered, absurd. Nathan turned, his cold eyes locking directly onto Jessica's. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any words. A heavy silence fell over the room, and in that silence they all understood. Things were about to change, and none of them could stop it. The atmosphere in the Pinnacle marketing office was so thick it felt like it could be cut into pieces. Jessica Monroe, still desperately clinging to the faint hope that remained, hurriedly stepped forward, forcing a twisted smile onto her face. She quickly ran a hand through her hair, adjusted her dress, and stretched out her hand, trying to sound cheerful. "Hello, Mr. Carter. I'm Jessica Monroe, account manager for Advertising Team 3. It's an honor to meet you." Her voice trembled slightly, partly from nerves, partly from the fear that was slowly sinking into every nerve. Nathan Carter didn't reach out to shake her hand. He didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge the greeting. His eyes simply swept over Jessica as though she were invisible. Then, in a deep voice that was as cold as it was spine-chilling, he spoke, "Who here has offended my wife?" My wife. Those two words dropped into the office like a thunderclap from an unclouded sky. Jessica blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Logan Reed nearly dropped his coffee, his fingers stiffening around the cup. Ashley Kim, usually quick and sharp on social media, now stood frozen, stiff as a statue. All the people who had just mocked Rachel Carter now looked like children caught stealing in broad daylight. In that suffocating moment, Rachel stood beside Nathan, quietly yet firmly. Not triumphant, not gloating, just a silence full of dignity. And in that silence, she became more radiant than any designer outfit in the room. Jessica swallowed, trying to regain her composure. She stammered, "You mean, wife?" She whipped her head around to look at Rachel, as if seeing this woman for the first time. She saw the warm brown skin, the deep brown eyes, and the delicate beauty hidden beneath the faded cardigan. And then, the bitter truth hit her. Rachel Carter, the woman she had just mocked, was Nathan Carter's wife. A flicker of panic flashed in Jessica's eyes, spreading like wildfire to the others in the room. Nathan took a step forward, forcing the entire room to instinctively step back. He glanced at Logan, then Ashley, then Brian Foster. Each sharp look like a blade, making them all tremble without him saying a word. "I've heard that for months now. My wife has been treated like garbage here." His voice was steady, but each word fell like a hammer. Humiliated, isolated, filmed, and broadcasted for ridicule. A swallowing sound echoed somewhere in the room, lingering like the toll of a death bell. Nathan crossed his arms, his gaze colder than ever. "I'll ask again. Who here has offended my wife?" No one answered. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Only Jessica, in a last-ditch effort to salvage the situation, stammered, We didn't know she was—" Nathan cut her off, his voice like molten steel. "She doesn't need to wear Prada or Chanel to be treated with the basic respect she deserves. She's here to work, to contribute, not to be humiliated by any of you." He paused, scanning the room one more time. Each head lowered to avoid his gaze. Each hand tightened around a chair. Each heart pounded with fear. Nathan lowered his voice, each word cutting through their fake pride like a blade. "You all consider yourselves elite, successful. But none of you, no matter how gilded, are worthy to stand next to her." Jessica trembled, clutching her dress so tightly her nails dug into her skin. Logan stepped back further, sweat beading on his forehead. Ashley lowered her head, lips pressed tight, struggling not to cry. Brian Foster, who had once looked down on Rachel, was now nothing more than a trembling shadow of himself. Rachel looked around the room, those once arrogant faces now full of fear, and for the first time she felt an unusual sense of peace inside. Not because of revenge, not because of victory, but because the truth had finally been laid bare. Nathan turned back to look at Rachel, his eyes softening, filled with pride. "You don't need to say anything, Rachel," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, I'll speak for you." And in that moment, Rachel knew she was no longer fighting alone. She had never been alone. The atmosphere in the Pinnacle marketing office was thick enough to be sliced into pieces after Nathan Carter's resolute declaration. The tension in the air stretched so tight it felt as if a single breath could shatter it. Logan Reed, Ashley Kim, and even Brian Foster stood frozen, their faces pale as wax statues beneath the harsh white light. They knew. They all knew. There was no turning back. Nathan, with his terrifying calmness, looked at each person. Each one who had either participated in or been complicit in the string of humiliations Rachel had endured. His gaze dissected them, peeling back the layers of fake grandeur they had cloaked themselves in. Then, in a deep but sharp voice, he bluntly asked, "You humiliated her just because she didn't wear Prada, yet you consider yourselves elite? Classy?" He paused for a beat, allowing each word to sink deep into the skin of every person standing there. "No, you are nothing but lowlifes." Jessica Monroe stiffened, her trembling hand clutching the sleeve of her jacket as though trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity she had left. Logan bowed his head, hunching his shoulders as if to make himself smaller. Ashley Kim, her face ashen, clenched her phone so tightly in her hand that it looked like it might shatter. Brian Foster, the man who once prided himself on being the one who steered the team of talents, now stood there speechless, his expensive suit failing to hide the pitiful aura radiating from him. Nathan took another step forward, his voice lowering, but each word struck like a blow to their faces. "She doesn't need designer clothes to define her worth. She doesn't need expensive heels to walk with dignity. And she certainly doesn't need flattery or embellishments to be recognized." He pointed to Rachel, standing firm beside him, the light from the window shining on her curly hair like a halo. "Because she has things none of you could ever buy. Conscience, dignity, and strength." A wave of shame surged through the room. Some of the employees who had been silent observers started whispering. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet his eyes. Others, those who had laughed at Rachel but now feared being dragged down with her, tried to shrink into the shadows, as if they could hide from the fury brewing in Nathan. But no one could hide. No one. Nathan turned, his gaze settling on Brian Foster, the highest-ranking accomplice among them. "You're the manager, right, Foster?" His voice was cold as steel. Brian nodded, his mouth stammering. I. You saw what happened." Nathan interrupted, his voice not loud but heavy like a hammer's blow. "You heard the insults. You saw the cowardly actions. And what did you choose to do?" A heavier silence than any excuse filled the room. Nathan didn't need further confirmation. He turned to Logan and Ashley. "And you two," he stressed, each word sharp as a blade, "filmed her mockery, posted it online to humiliate a colleague just because she didn't fit your standards. Ask yourselves, how many likes did you think you'd get from destroying a person?" Ashley burst into sobs, but her crying only deepened the scorn in everyone's eyes. Logan grit his teeth, his jaw clenched, but the cold sweat trickling down his temples betrayed his hidden fear. Nathan turned to Jessica, delivering the final blow. "And you, Monroe, led the charge, inciting, humiliating, laughing at someone's pain as if it were your right to control their life. I wonder, have you ever asked yourself what you have other than expensive dresses?" Jessica opened her mouth to justify herself, but Nathan raised his hand, signaling for silence. "No need to answer. The answer is already written on your face." The room was drowned in a deadly silence. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loudly. They all stood there, stripped bare by the harsh truth they could no longer deny. No more makeup, no more designer labels, no more the veneer of fake success. Only weak, corrupt people, trembling in the face of a man's wrath, and the silent resilience of a woman they had once scorned. Nathan looked at Rachel. In his eyes there was not only protection but respect, pride, and admiration that he didn't try to hide. He gave her a slight nod, as if silently making a promise. And Rachel, though her heart still ached, returned the gaze with unshakable resolve. She was no longer afraid, because she knew. Those who had pushed her to the edge would finally pay the price. The air in the Pinnacle marketing office had thickened after Nathan Carter's brutal revelations. The silence now wasn't awkward or embarrassed. It was heavy, sharp as a knife, hanging between the people who had once thought they were untouchable. Nathan turned, facing the entire room, his voice rising, clear, definitive, leaving no room for hope. "I will not let this go as a simple apology." His gaze swept over Jessica Monroe, Logan Reed, Ashley Kim, and Brian Foster, each one in turn. "You've created a toxic environment. You've humiliated, degraded, and intentionally destroyed a colleague's spirit, not for any reason other than your own arrogance and pettiness." He paused, letting each word sink in. Then, with a voice as cold as steel, Nathan declared, "Therefore, as of this moment, Jessica Monroe, Logan Reed, Ashley Kim, and Brian Foster, you are all immediately terminated." A choked gasp echoed from Jessica. She staggered back a step, as though the blow hit her square in the chest without even needing to touch her. Logan stammered, "Mr. Carter, please, just wait a moment. This is just a misunderstanding." Ashley burst into tears, clutching Logan's sleeve as though searching for something to hold on to. Brian Foster, still somewhat more composed, tried to force a conciliatory smile. "Mr. Carter, I can explain. We were just joking. No one thought it would escalate like this." Nathan smiled coldly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Joking," he repeated, his voice heavy as lead. "When you threw soda on her? When you filmed her mockery, posted it online for amusement? When you made her endure day after day, hour after hour, in silence and humiliation?" He tilted his head, his voice lowering, colder still. "If that's a joke, then you should all go back and learn what the concept of character really means." The entire room was silent. Some of the other employees, those who hadn't participated but hadn't stopped it either, bowed their heads, not daring to look up. They knew, even if they didn't directly engage, their silence contributed to this crime. Nathan didn't stop there. He fired another decisive shot. "I will personally ensure that your names and the actions you've taken today will be remembered throughout the entire industry. Don't even think about trying to get hired anywhere in this city, in this region, in this industry." His eyes, cold as a sword, locked onto the four condemned. "Every time you submit a job application, every time you try to start over, you will face exactly what you've done to Rachel today." Jessica nearly collapsed. Logan stood, frozen, as if turned to stone. Ashley was crying uncontrollably, her expensive makeup smudged into streaks of ruin. Brian, once at the top of the power ladder in this office, now stood as a hollow shadow, stumbling as if he had lost his soul. Just then, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. No explanation was needed. No orders had to be given. They walked straight toward Jessica, Logan, Ashley, and Brian, signaling them politely but firmly. "Pack your things. Leave immediately." Jessica screamed, losing control. "You can't do this," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. I've worked here for 3 years. I've contributed. I have a record." Nathan shrugged, his face devoid of sympathy. 3 years. A record. But one cowardly act has erased it all. That's the price you pay when you forget about character. He said it quietly, but it reverberated through the stillness of the room. Logan tried to plead. "Mr. Carter, give us a chance. We'll apologize to her. We'll make it right." Nathan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "You don't apologize because you regret it. You apologize because you're scared. And I don't reward those who only apologize after being caught red-handed." Rachel stood there, silently observing. She didn't say a word. No smile, no gloating. Just her gaze, calm, deep, capturing the moment when the truth, at last, triumphed. A few employees around the room now looked at Rachel differently. No longer with disdain, no longer with cold, indifferent glances, but with respect. Respect for a woman who had endured, stood firm, and now was reclaiming justice in the most beautiful way possible. Nathan turned to Rachel, gently extending his hand. "Let's go, my love." Without looking back, Rachel took his hand. And in the bewildered, panicked, regretful eyes of the fired employees, they left the office, walking toward the elevator waiting for them, leaving behind a world of lies that had collapsed under its own decay. The elevator doors were already open, awaiting Rachel and Nathan like a gateway out of the cold hell she had endured. They stepped forward, walking with calm strides under the stunned and bewildered gazes of everyone in the office. But just as Rachel's hand was about to press the button, a shrill scream shattered the deadly silence. "You think you're so special, huh?" Jessica Monroe yelled, her voice breaking with desperation. Her hand slammed down on the desk so hard that her coffee cup flew up, spilling its contents everywhere. Her once confident gray-green eyes were now bloodshot, contorted with rage. Jessica took a step forward, pointing a trembling finger at Rachel, her voice screeching like nails on a chalkboard. "You're nothing but a gold-digging woman. Without him, you're nothing, a parasite." The venom, the humiliation, and the envy blended in every syllable, like poison no longer held back. Logan Reed, provoked by Jessica's fury, jumped up from his seat, his face turning red. She definitely used some tricks to get to the boss. Look at her pathetic, poor state. Who would even look at her if there wasn't something shady going on? He swung his arm around, pointing, his slanderous words pouring out like a storm, full of bitterness and despair. She must have slept with him, pretending to be innocent to climb high, fake. The chaotic screams echoed through the room, mingling with Ashley Kim's choking sobs, the sound of furniture being knocked over, and the whispers of other employees who were horrified and slowly backing away. A few people covered their mouths, shocked not only by the cruel insults, but by the shamelessness of those who had once been at the top, now peeling off their masks before everyone. Rachel stood still. She didn't tremble. She wasn't angry. There was just a calmness, a coldness in her gaze, as if those venomous words couldn't touch her anymore. Because she knew anyone who's about to fall will thrash desperately, spewing their last venom before being drowned. Nathan Carter, still standing protectively in front of Rachel, slowly turned to face Jessica and Logan. No anger, no need to argue. His voice was low but heavy, like thunder. "She doesn't owe any of you an explanation." He took another step forward, his gaze sharp as a sword. "Not in front of those who sold their dignity for a mere illusion of petty power. Not in front of those who buried their humanity under layers of makeup and flashy suits." His words reverberated off the glass walls, the marble floors, plunging the entire room into an unforgiving sense of judgment. Jessica stepped back, her legs trembling. Logan fell silent, his face turning from red to pale. Ashley Kim sank into her chair, covering her face as she sobbed desperately. Brian Foster, once the leader, didn't dare look up anymore, gripping his briefcase tightly like it was his last lifeline. Nathan continued, his voice steady and sharp like a blade. Rachel didn't climb up on anyone's back. She walks with her own talent, dignity, and resolve, something you, no matter how hard you try, can never buy with money or fame. Each of his words struck like a hammer, shattering the fragile illusions they had built around themselves. Rachel, still silent from the beginning, stepped up next to Nathan. She stood tall, her gaze proud but not arrogant. Her silence, without the need for words, was the most beautiful and powerful response. She didn't need to lower herself to argue with those who had burned their own integrity. Nathan gave a small nod, like an undeniable full stop. He extended his hand. Rachel took it. Without looking back, they walked into the elevator. The steel doors slowly closed, shutting out the cries, the slanders, and the desperate sobs behind them. What remained was only the steadfast calm, and victory. A victory that didn't need to scream, a victory built on dignity and true strength. The elevator doors closed behind Rachel and Nathan, leaving a heavy, eerie silence on the 6th floor of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Gone was the power of glossy appearances. Gone was the arrogance masking empty greed. Only pale faces, downcast eyes, and irreversible collapse remained. And then, as if to finalize the sentence already handed down, 2 security guards in black uniforms entered the office. They didn't need to ask questions. They didn't need to politely request. Everything had already been arranged. One guard approached Jessica Monroe, who was trembling uncontrollably, clutching her handbag as though it were a life raft in a sea of death. The other stepped toward Logan Reed, Ashley Kim, and Brian Foster, who now resembled veiled shadows waiting for the final gust of wind to blow them away. Jessica struggled weakly when the guard touched her arm. "Let go. I'm not going anywhere. I'll sue. I'll call a lawyer," she shouted, her voice breaking with despair. But her screams only echoed miserably in the room, now swallowed by the cold, unyielding silence. No one stood by her. No sympathetic glances, no words of defense, only cold, indifferent glances. The same eyes that once praised, that once followed her lead, now turning away as though avoiding a plague. Logan Reed no longer had the strength to shout. He walked like a zombie, shuffling behind the guard, his shiny leather shoes dragging on the marble floor. Ashley Kim, her face streaked with mascara and expensive makeup melting away, sobbed like a lost child, clutching her phone as though it were holding on to the shattered remnants of her past. Brian Foster, once the most confident manager on the 6th floor, now walked with his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit wrinkled like the skin of a defeated man. The 4 defeated shadows trudged out of the office, no longer the powerful figures that once walked with arrogance, but broken, tattered bodies crushed by their own pride and cruelty. The large glass door leading out of the office closed behind them with a heavy click, like the sound of a life sentence being handed down. Left behind, Rachel Carter stood still. She didn't move forward. She didn't smile in victory. She didn't utter a single word of scorn. Her gaze, steady, deep, watched them leave, devoid of pity but also free of hatred. It was simply a quiet strength, the unyielding pride of a woman who had chosen to stand tall when the whole world wanted to knock her down. The remaining colleagues, those who had stayed silent all these months, no longer dared meet Rachel's eyes. Some lowered their heads. Some secretly wiped their brows. Others slowly stepped back, as if hoping to disappear from this haunting room. They knew, in that moment, Rachel Carter, the simple black woman who had once been scorned for not wearing Prada, had become the center of it all. Not because of her husband's power, but because of her own strength. Beside Rachel, Nathan Carter gently squeezed her hand, a light grip like a quiet praise. No one in the Pinnacle office would ever forget that image. The woman who had been most despised, now leaving in silence, head held high, proud as a warrior without a weapon. And those who had once laughed at her pain, who had whispered behind her back, now stood in quiet, shameful defeat, watching from afar. The elevator slowly took Rachel and Nathan down, leaving the 6th floor behind as a part of the past that would never be revisited. No more tears, no more resentment, only steady footsteps leading toward the light of freedom. When the elevator doors closed, when the final ding echoed, carrying Rachel and Nathan away from the fateful 6th floor, it marked the end of a chapter in her life. No need to look back. No need to carry anything but her self-respect and freedom. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, the place that once symbolized her youthful dreams, now was nothing more than a faint scar in her memory, reminding her that what we endure does not define our worth. It is how we rise that truly matters. Rachel left Pinnacle quietly. No social media posts, no fanfare. Simply disappearing from that place as though she had never existed. But those who remained, those who witnessed that day, would forever carry the memory of the simple black woman who forced an entire arrogant system to bow its head in silence. With Nathan's quiet support, Rachel started anew. Not by taking a position at another big corporation. She had seen enough of the cold glass walls. Instead, she chose her own path. Becoming a freelancer, specializing in data analysis consulting for small businesses and non-profit organizations. The ones who couldn't afford to hire the big players, but needed dedication, skill, and genuine sincerity. Rachel found joy in that work, not because of money, but because of the value she could create, the subtle but profound changes she could leave in the lives of others. Her days were no longer filled with soul-crushing meetings in cold glass rooms. No longer were her mornings rushed, filled with worry over being judged for the clothes she wore. Instead, she worked from a small, sunlit room in her cozy apartment, with a simple cup of coffee beside her and soft music playing from an old speaker. She lived as her true self. No need to ask for permission. No need to prove anything. Meanwhile, those who had once considered themselves the kings and queens of Pinnacle, the ones who trampled on the dignity of others to arrogantly rise, slowly began to reap the consequences. Jessica Monroe, with her record permanently tarnished by the scandal Nathan Carter exposed, became a name no one dared touch in the marketing industry. She was unemployed for months, attending interviews where she was met only with cold stares and polite but brutal rejections. A few times she tried to start a small business, opening her own consulting firm, but clients turned away after checking her work history. Jessica, who once considered herself the epitome of success, was now nothing but a cautionary tale in the industry. Never underestimate anyone. Logan Reed fared no better. His reputation plummeted like a stone. No company wanted to hire an employee who had been fired for bullying a colleague. No partner wanted to collaborate with someone carrying a bad reputation in the media. From proudly flaunting his Rolex, Logan now only carried resumes to low-level job fairs, places he once sneered at and never considered stepping foot in. Ashley Kim, once the Instagram queen, suffered a more brutal blow. When the truth of her bullying was exposed on social media, brands swiftly cut sponsorship contracts. Her followers plummeted like a waterfall. The meticulously edited photos, the lavish makeup clips, now only garnered a few pity likes. No more fame, no more income. Just a young woman lost in the very virtual world she once worshipped. Brian Foster nearly disappeared entirely from the industry. After the painful fall at Pinnacle, no company dared hire a manager accused of fostering a toxic work environment. A lifetime of building achievements now collapsed in silence. Some say he moved to a small town down south, doing temporary consulting work for family-owned shops. No one spoke of him anymore, no one remembered. And that was the harshest punishment for someone who once considered themselves invincible. Rachel never spoke of them. She didn't need to. She didn't need to shout her victory. Her silence, her quiet progress forward, was the most beautiful revenge. Because she had survived, she had overcome, she had won, not through retaliation but by staying true to herself. And when evening came, in that sunlit apartment, Rachel would often sit by the balcony, holding a warm cup of tea, her gaze distant as she looked toward the bright Chicago horizon. Nothing chased her anymore, nothing bound her. There was only a woman, strong, free, and unconquerable. The evening in Chicago bathed the city in a sea of golden light, like galaxies trapped between the towering skyscrapers. A soft breeze whispered through the expansive balcony of the penthouse apartment. The city light sparkled in Rachel Carter's deep brown eyes as she leaned against the railing, the warm cup of tea gently warming her palms. Behind her, Nathan silently walked over and stood beside her, no words needed. He knew that moments like this, when she stood in a quiet stillness releasing the weight from her shoulders, were more precious than anything in the world. Rachel looked up at the brilliant night sky, the artificial stars below shimmering like thousands of broken dreams being reborn. A small, fragile, yet powerful smile appeared on her lips. Her voice, low and gentle, broke the silence. "You don't need to destroy them." Her words weren't filled with blame. It was simply a truth, gentle, as if she understood the world and was letting go of what had passed. Nathan turned to look at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in a soft smile, tinged with a hint of regret and pride. "I'm not destroying them, Ra. They're destroying themselves. I'm just making them feel the consequences of what they've sown." His voice was soft, but beneath it lay cold steel, a strength that didn't need to scream to be felt. Rachel tilted her head, looking at him, and in that moment she knew Nathan didn't need to take revenge for her, because the simple truth was, those who choose to despise, who choose to trample on the dignity of others, will eventually bring about their own downfall. No need to raise a hand, no need to dirty herself, because justice, though slow, always finds its way to the right people. Rachel turned her head, once again gazing at the vast city below her. She took a deep breath, full, complete. Not with the feeling of victory, not with arrogance, but with the deepest freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from imposed prejudices, freedom from the way the world once tried to trap her. She had won, not because Nathan was a billionaire, not because she bore the Carter name, but because throughout that stormy journey she never lost herself. She didn't trade her dignity for recognition. She didn't fall to hatred. She didn't let bitterness turn her heart to stone. Rachel smiled, a radiant, gentle smile that was invincible. In the windswept air, her curly hair gently framed her face, like a portrait capturing true strength. Not strength measured by status, not by the balance in a bank account, but by self-respect, by integrity, by the quiet yet unyielding determination of a simple black woman. Under the distant twinkling lights, where the endless streets of Chicago never slept, Rachel Carter knew she had found the most precious thing. Not admiration, not the recognition of outsiders, but the peace in knowing she had lived right, fought right, and kept herself whole, even if it meant facing the whole world. Nathan gently squeezed her hand. No words needed. Under the night sky, the two stood side by side. No need for noisy glory, no need for applause, only the truth. And that truth, like a silent flame, would continue to light their path. Long, wide, free, and unconquerable. And that is the story of Rachel Carter, the simple black woman who proved that dignity and self-respect are things that cannot be taken, no matter how hard the world tries to crush her. No designer labels, no lavish veneers. With nothing but determination, dignity, and quiet strength, she overcame it all, and left behind a lesson for those who once scorned her. True power comes from within. What do you think of Rachel's quiet yet resilient journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reflections. If you enjoy stories about strength, justice, and the value of humanity, don't forget to like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories.